It was supposed to be a simple family photograph, one of those stiff-postured portraits taken on a warm afternoon in the summer of 1912, but historians would later agree on one thing: nothing about this image was simple when viewed closely enough. The photograph was discovered not in a museum or an archive but in a shoebox sealed with brittle tape, buried in the attic of a farmhouse outside of Staunton, Virginia. The house had been condemned after decades of vacancy, and workers were clearing debris when they found the box wedged behind a fallen beam. Inside were dozens of photographs from 1890 to 1930, baptisms, weddings, school poses, front porch gatherings, nothing unusual at first glance. But one picture was different. Two young cousins, both around 9 or 10, stood shoulder to shoulder in front of the house's east-facing window, the kind of wavy, imperfect glass common in early American homes. They wore plain clothes, suspenders, boots, their hair combed flat, their expressions a mix of formality and nervousness. A faint shadow stretched behind them, the photographer's long exposure capturing the stillness of children who'd been told not to move. To anyone flipping through quickly, the photo looked like a typical pre-war family moment: two boys staring into the camera, sunlight washing over the wooden siding behind them. But the archivist who first examined it, a man named Daniel Harker, was known for noticing things others didn't. As he handled the near-faded print under his magnifier, his eyes stopped on something at the very edge of the frame. And in that instant, his breath caught. Because there, faint but unmistakable, was the pale outline of a face peering through the window behind the boys. A face that should not have been there. A face that did not match anyone in the family records. A face staring directly into the lens. Daniel didn't say anything at first. He simply adjusted the lamp on his desk, pulled the photo closer, and zoomed in with a digital scanner. The grain sharpened, the contrast deepened, and the details emerged, slowly, like a darkroom image blooming to life. The face was not distorted by the glass the way reflections usually are. Instead, it appeared unnervingly clear. Eyes dark and wide. A mouth slightly open. Cheekbones sharp. Not a child. Not an elderly person. But someone of indeterminate age, expressionless, steady, and horribly present. Daniel checked the exposure characteristics: long exposure typical for 1912, soft blur around the boy's cuffs and shoes, slight motion in the leaves. If someone had been inside the house, pressed to the window, the long exposure should have blurred them or faded them completely. But the face in the window was unnaturally crisp, almost as if it had been deliberately waiting there, unmoving. The more Daniel observed, the more inconsistencies emerged. There was the angle: for one, the window sat higher than the heads of the boys, meaning an adult would have needed to crouch or kneel to be visible. Yet the face was positioned perfectly centered, not raised, not lowered, staring at almost the exact height of the photographer's lens. He compared the lighting. The boy's shadows suggested sunlight coming from the left, but the face in the glass had no corresponding shadow, no glare, no highlight. It looked lit from nowhere. Or, he would later note privately, everywhere. Within days, Daniel contacted the County Historical Society. The house, he learned, had belonged to the Rowan family. The two boys were identified from scribbles on the back of the photo: Thomas and Henry. Summer, Mama says hold still. But there was no reference to anyone else being present. No unknown visitor. No older sibling. And most importantly, no reason anyone should have been inside the sealed-up room behind that window. Because according to renovation records dated 1908, 4 years before the photo, the interior behind the window had been boarded from the inside to prevent drafts. Meaning that in the photograph, the face was standing on the other side of a wall. Daniel traveled to Staunton to investigate. He described later that stepping into the abandoned house felt like stepping into the photograph itself: the same warped wooden floors, the same wallpaper curling outward, the same faint smell of dust and mildew trapped in the beams. When he reached the east-facing window, he stopped cold. The interior room was smaller than expected, barely large enough for a single chair. And behind the window, Just as the record said, the entire wall was reinforced with vertical planks dating to the early 1900s. No space to stand. No opening behind the window. No room for anyone at all. So how had a face appeared there in 1912? He took measurements, compared photographs, consulted carpenters, examined nails under a microscope. Nothing suggested the boards had ever been removed. Even if someone had wanted to climb between the inner wall and the exterior siding, the cavity was less than 4 inches deep. It was physically impossible for a human head, let alone an entire face, to appear there. Yet the photograph showed it undeniably. Daniel contacted genealogists who began tracing the Rowan family tree. They uncovered unusual details: a missing relative named Samuel Rowan, born 1886, last seen in 1903, whispered rumors of mental illness, references in church letters to a troubling incident in the East Room. But no clear records, no death certificate, and no explanation as to why his name abruptly vanished from census documents. The deeper Daniel dug, the more disturbing patterns emerged. In the Rowan family Bible, tucked between pressed flowers and faded birth notes, he found a fragment of handwritten text: "Do not let the children near the east window." He watches. He mimics. He learns them. No signature. No date. But the handwriting matched that of the boy's mother, Clara Rowan. And underneath, faintly penciled in by a different hand, were 4 words: "Still there after dark." Historians who reviewed the photograph noted inconsistencies that challenged normal assumptions. The face in the window aligned too perfectly with the camera's plane. Early cameras required deliberate setup, careful tripod placement, and measured exposure. For something inside a dim room to appear as clearly as the outdoor subjects, the lighting would have needed to match exactly, yet early 1900s homes had no electric bulbs in that section, and even a lamp would have cast shadows inconsistent with the image. More strangely, slight distortions visible on the boys, minor blur in the fingers, faint movement in the hair, did not appear anywhere on the figure's face. It was perfectly still. Unnaturally so. Daniel reached out to the only surviving Rowan descendant, an elderly woman named Martha, living in North Carolina. When shown the photograph, she stared at it for a long time before speaking. "My grandmother told us never to talk about that place," she said. "She said a boy went missing in the house. But her mother swore he never left." When pressed for more detail, she reluctantly shared fragments passed down in hushed family retellings. A child in the house had developed a habit of standing in doorways long after the family thought he'd gone to bed. He would repeat conversations he wasn't present for, mimicking voices. Neighbors described seeing him staring from upper windows long after he had supposedly been sent away to live with distant relatives. Some claimed Clara Rowan boarded up the East Room to keep him contained, though no one could agree on what that meant. Others said the family avoided walking past that side of the house after sunset. Then Martha said something that made Daniel's hands shake. "My grandmother said the boy stopped aging," she whispered. "They said he stayed the same height, the same face, the same expression, year after year. But whenever someone tried to look directly at him, he turned blurry, like a smudge in the corner of their vision." She paused. "Except in reflections. In glass, you could see him clearly." Daniel looked back at the photograph. The face in the window had no blur. It was the clearest part of the entire image. Determined to find more evidence, he began analyzing other photographs from the shoebox. Individually, the pictures seemed peaceful: picnics, front steps, cousins gathering for birthdays. But a pattern emerged: every image taken near the east side of the house contained some anomaly. A smudge in a pane of glass. A faint silhouette behind lace curtains. A shape reflected in a tin kettle. Always vague, always at the edge of the frame. Except one. In a photograph from 1909, 3 years before the cousin's portrait, a group of adults stood near the barn, posing after a harvest. Far in the background, nearly invisible unless zoomed in, a small figure stood at the east window. Same height. Same proportions. Same expression. Just watching. Daniel's research reached the attention of Dr. Elise Merrow, a specialist in early photographic anomalies. She examined the scans and noted something chilling. Across the photographs, despite different angles, different distances, different times of day, the face never changed. Not the eyebrows. Not the hairline. Not the tilt of the mouth. This is not a living subject captured accidentally, she concluded. This is a fixed template. Like a repeated imprint. Theories emerged. Some suggested double exposure, but Daniel disproved this by analyzing the plate negatives: no overlapping emulsion, no secondary exposure marks. Others suggested a doll or mannequin placed behind the window. But Manor records indicated that the East Room had been empty for years and sealed shut. And no object could have aligned so precisely with the boy's poses, nor appeared with such lifelike depth in the photograph. Then Daniel discovered something he shouldn't have. While reviewing county property archives, he found a stack of letters written between 1896 and 1904 from the local sheriff to a judge in Richmond. The letters referenced a search for a missing child, details redacted, but one line stood out: if he is still in that house, he is not there in any form that can be retrieved by law or reason. Another letter mentioned the east window explicitly. A final one ended abruptly with a scribbled warning: it shows itself in photographs but not in person. Daniel continued digging until the house's foundation itself offered clues. Behind the boarded inner wall of the East Room, he uncovered something unexpected: marks etched into the planks. Not random scratches. Not animal damage. Human carvings. Dozens of vertical lines, like a child marking days. But the boards dated to after the room had been sealed, meaning the marks were carved from the inside, at a time when no one could physically have entered. He sent high-contrast scans to a forensic analyst, who estimated the carvings were made by fingernails or a similarly small, blunt instrument. But what froze Daniel was the pattern: 365 marks. Exactly 1 year's worth. Perfectly aligned. As if someone, or something, inside the sealed room was tracking the passage of time without ever leaving. When Daniel compared the height of the carvings to the photograph of the face in the window, they aligned precisely at the same level. Meanwhile, digital enhancement of the cousin's photograph revealed a final, terrifying detail. The face in the window was not merely present, it was pressed against the glass. Fine condensation marks suggested shallow breath. And at the lower corner of the window, something else appeared. A hand. Too small for an adult. Too elongated for a child. Fingers spread as if pressing toward the boys outside. Only visible when enhanced to the highest resolution, but undeniable once spotted. Daniel began to piece together a timeline. Samuel Rowan went missing around 1903. The East Room was boarded shortly after. Family records showed increasing anxiety in Clara's notes. Neighbors avoided the house. Children warned not to play near the windows. And photographs, taken by different family members across nearly a decade, continued to capture the same silent face gazing out from the same pane of glass. A presence unchanged by time, unblurred by movement, unaffected by the years passing outside. And then, abruptly, the photographs stopped after 1912. No more images of the house. No more family portraits outdoors. No more references to the window. It was as if the family collectively decided to stop documenting anything, as if acknowledging the presence made it stronger. Within 5 years, the Rowans moved out entirely. The house sat abandoned for decades. Daniel's final discovery came not from archives but from the house itself. In the crawl space beneath the East Room, behind a fallen beam, he found a small wooden box. Inside were scraps of paper, brittle and yellowed. Notes written by Clara Rowan. Frantic, uneven handwriting repeated one phrase: "It learns faces." Another read: "It copies what it sees but cannot follow once the glass breaks." A third simply said: "Never turn your back to the east window at dusk." Daniel returned to the attic where the shoebox of photographs had first been found, moving slowly this time, as if the air itself had thickened and remembered what he had seen. The rafters above him creaked with the same familiar complaint, but the sound felt different now, less structural, more like a quiet shifting, as though the house exhaled the moment his foot hit the top step. Dust drifted in thin, floating veils, stirred by the faintest movements, and each particle caught the weak attic light like tiny suspended sparks. He kneeled beside the old trunk again, the boards beneath him groaning in a tired rhythm, and opened the lid with the hesitation of someone approaching a wound they knew had not properly healed. Inside, the shoebox sat exactly where it had been left days earlier, its cardboard softened by age, corners frayed, the lid holding a faint water stain shaped like an uneven ring. When he opened it, the familiar stack of stiff, curling photographs greeted him in their silent, accusing way. But as he sifted through them, one by one, he felt something subtle, an unease that hadn't been there the first time. It was as if someone had rearranged them, not drastically, but with the quiet intent of guiding him to something he had overlooked. He kept going until he reached the bottom, where he froze. There, stuck to the inner corner of the box like it had once been damp, was a final photograph, one he was certain he had not seen before. It wasn't tucked between the others. It wasn't partially hidden. It was simply there, at the very bottom, as if it had surfaced, not been found. He peeled it away carefully, feeling the slight tension of old paper resisting separation. The image was different from the rest. It had been taken years after the family had moved from the house, long after the documented timeline of the cousins' lives. The building in the picture stood in a state of deliberate decay, siding warped, roofline sagging, vines clawing their way upward along the frame. The yard looked untouched for decades, grass tall and uneven, shrubs wild and brittle. Every window was filmed with grime, their panes streaked by years of rain and wind. And yet the photograph carried a strange clarity, as if the element that mattered most inside the frame had never aged at all. Because in the east window, the same east window that had caused all the questions in the original 1912 photograph, there was a faint face still looking out. Daniel leaned closer, breath slowing. The proportions were the same. The expression was the same. It hadn't changed, not even slightly. No sag of age, no distortion from time, no difference in angle or size. It looked copy and pasted from the earlier image, as though whatever appeared there in 1912 had stayed in that same position through every passing decade, watching an empty yard and waiting for something it recognized. But now, in this more recent photograph, the face was pressed closer to the glass. So close the features blurred slightly against the pane, like condensation from breath or the faint smear of skin had left a mark. It was as if it had known someone would come looking again, and it had leaned forward, straining to see who had returned. Daniel felt his pulse climb into his throat, but he forced himself to remain steady. He photographed the attic setup for documentation, then took the mysterious picture downstairs to examine in bright light. The face in the window did not respond to different angles or brightness. It remained steady, watching, alert, unmistakably purposeful. He stared at it longer than he meant to. Something about the eyes, not their shape, but their intent, made him feel like he had intruded on a moment he was never meant to witness. Still unsettled but committed to understanding the truth behind the photographs, Daniel returned to the old property the next morning. The house still stood, though barely. Its porch sagged, boards buckled, the remaining shutters hanging crookedly. The air around it felt colder than the rest of the woods, the silence heavier, and even the wind seemed to avoid the east side of the house. He raised his camera toward the window, not the original 1912 glass, but the same frame, and took several shots for comparison. To his eyes, the room appeared dark, empty, undisturbed. But when he checked the first photo on his camera screen, he saw something he had not seen with his own eyes, the faint outline of the same face, hovering behind the glass exactly where it had been in the shoebox picture. And in the second shot, taken from a slightly different angle, a second shape had begun to materialize behind the first. Not a reflection. Not a trick of light. The evolving suggestion of another face, smaller, softer, forming itself slowly, as though the darkness inside the boarded room was studying the living and learning how to imitate what it saw. 2 months later, the house was demolished. Not because of Daniel's findings, but because the county had deemed it structurally unsafe. He arrived the day after the demolition, walking through the broken remains of the east wall and scattering splinters beneath his boots. The boards that had once enclosed the room were stacked neatly to the side, awaiting transport to the dump. When he examined them under the bright morning light, he saw markings, new carvings that had not been visible before demolition. At first he thought they were simple scratches from collapse. But they were too precise. Too deliberate. Not tally marks. Not accidental gouges. They were faces. Dozens of them. Some only roughly shaped, others unnervingly accurate, eyes, brows, noses, mouths carved as if someone with no proper tools had worked slowly, over many years, engraving the outline of every person who had ever stood before that window. Some faces were distorted, as though carved from memory instead of direct observation, but one stood out with chilling clarity, Daniel's own, unmistakable in its proportions, appearing newer than the rest. As if something inside had recognized him. As if it had been waiting. The photograph of the two cousins, the one that started all of this, now sits sealed in the Historical Society archive, locked inside a climate-controlled drawer lined with acid-free materials. No one displays it. No interns are allowed to handle it. And beneath the digital scan file, Daniel added a single line. Not an explanation. Not a warning for the public. But a message to whoever might one day be curious enough to zoom in on the window the way he once had. 14 words, nothing more. Do not view at full zoom after dark. The reflection is too clear.